everyone. Welcome to our first ever episode of the Tualatin Talks podcast, led by the Tualatin Youth Advisory Council. Today's episode is hosted by me, Ali Marks, along with Claire Koo, and our guest today is Dustin O'Donnell. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. O'Donnell.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be here.
So, Mr. O'Donnell is a teacher at the Tualatin High School, and along with that, you are also working closely with ASB as senior coordinator. If you could just talk a little bit about that, about your roles, your experiences, and maybe, how this year has been approached differently than like past years.
Yeah. The senior advisory piece, I was able to get into about, I would say like 6 or 7 years ago. It's maybe my favorite part whenever I maybe think about what roles in the school that I would ever want to jump away from. The idea of being disconnected from student leadership is not something I'm ready to give up yet. And senior specifically, because I end up teaching a lot of senior classes normally and traditionally. And so being able to both like have them in class and then hear from them and also be able to like then talk to our senior ASB officers to make sure that those visions and those experiences work with one another, I think is really important. Also, I mean, seniors have some of the cooler events in terms of sunrise and sunset. There's graduation. There's all this excitement and anticipation about just what the senior year is. And so being a part of that is something that I find really important. And that said, this year has been non-existent and not, I don't think to anyone's detriment. I think that there's an inherent understanding that maybe we need to dump some of the things we did normally and all the time. And knowing full well that we can't have, for example, a normal senior sunrise means that I'm not certain it's worth students' time or mindset to think about senior sunrise, right? Or not everything needs to happen the way it did last time. It's starting to ramp up a little bit in terms of meetings and thoughts with other senior ASB officers. But even still, that has everything to do with whether or not we go back and how, under what capacity. There's also a lot of adults that have the same ideas who really want to take charge. And so at a certain point, and I'm certain you are aware of this, at a certain point, the students take the backseat, which means the person who's in maybe the point person for the students takes the backseat.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Actually, you kind of covered my next question, but it's always interesting to hear the perspective of a teacher because, as students going through this like crazy distance learning, like, yeah, it's challenging, but I can't even begin to imagine how challenging it is for you guys. So maybe like you could talk us through some of the kind of different pros and cons this year of like, as as a teacher working through the pandemic.
Yeah. First and foremost, I think that it's important to remember that like, and I appreciate what you say in terms of I can't imagine what it's like for you, right? I think that the converse is really important to remember. And I would say that any teachers or any students who might be doing okay right now in terms of the process of school, I think that has a lot to do with whether or not they see what the other person's going through. Like we have teachers who are very upset that students don't turn on their video, but then in staff meetings, we have teachers who don't turn on their video, right? And so I think that just some compassion over it is necessary in terms of like how the pandemic has maybe altered or affected teaching. I think that it was really, I don't think it was a good thing, right? But I do think it was a necessary thing where that lesson that you love, that you want to get to every year, doesn't mean that they love it and doesn't mean that it's also the most important thing. And that's been maybe where I'm most enlightened is how much of my curriculum I could just abandon And not that it wasn't good, but that like in terms of what is it that I need to get through right now, and get through right now, I think is just the relationship piece, which is a lot easier in a classroom. And then you can sort of over ask, right? If you have a good relationship, I think with students, you can over ask them on assignments, and they'll do it. But if you don't have that, then it's really difficult to give them like daily work at the same rigorous pace. I think the standards remain the same, but I think the pacing has to slow down. And so that's been something that I'm really excited about going forward, is going back into the classroom and figuring out, okay, we don't have up to an hour, right? Which sometimes is like 25 or 35 minutes. We have 90 minutes again. So what does 90 minutes of instruction look like after I know for a fact that I can pare my lessons down to 35 minutes, right? Which is really exciting, actually.
So what, in your opinion, about the high school experience do you think is going under the radar and needs to be talked about more often?
What needs to be maybe more part of talked about within the high school experience? I think it's just the reality that adults don't have it all figured out, just like you don't. And that's okay. I think that provides the opportunity for some authentic give and take. And something that is important for teachers to remember is like, we are the experts in terms of how to teach, but we are not the experts in terms of like mental health, or in terms of what's going on in your home, or like there are things that we are not in charge of, and we're really comfortable being in charge. And so I think just allowing the opportunity for students to be a little bit more a part of the classroom has been most effective for me. And obviously, if you get students such as Allie Marks and Claire Coos of the world who actually buy into it and want to challenge themselves and want to have fun and want to engage their peers in it, that always helps out. So I think that it works both ways. The fact that you say that my classroom provides that is great and like makes me feel extremely humbled. And I would say that the other part of that is students' willingness to buy in. So thank you.
Speaking of more teaching, what do you find most fulfilling about your job? Like, what do you love most about being a teacher?
Sure. So hard. I think, because I've thought about leaving a few times. Young me thought about, is this really what I want to do? Is this really where my talents are best utilized? Is this where I'm going to find fulfillment? And I think that what I ultimately came around to is that I think the environment is infectious. Tualatin specifically is a really great community. I don't know what my reaction would be if I had maybe say a tougher demographic. I don't know if I'm cut out for that type of teaching. And I'm not saying I'm not. I'm just saying that like that's not what I chose, and that's not what was presented to me. And I really did not want to burn out. And so I think the thing about teaching, and this is cliche, but like it really is, it's students and it's relationships. And I have 10 of my best friends I actually get to work with, which is not normal for most people. The other thing I like about it is that it's a career that actually builds upon itself. So every year I get to reflect, what did I do well? What did I not do well? What do I want to get rid of? What's interesting and I can implement that day? And I have friends of mine who don't have that, right? They slog through every week and then they're excited for a weekend. And I don't mean it in terms of like, I get my summers. I mean it in terms of like the summers allow me the opportunity to reflect what actually went well. And so I think that teaching, besides the fact that I get to be confronted with excited youth, because I tell my seniors every year, the thing I love teaching about seniors is that no matter what you think is going to happen in your world or in your life, you're right, because it hasn't happened yet. And if there are things, right, eventually that you'll take a turn and maybe some options are cut off for a little bit. But right now you get to do whatever you want. And professionally, every year I get the chance to reevaluate, which then means I get to do whatever I want the next year. And so I think remembering that teaching is learning is probably the best thing. I mean, there was a lot of things in there, but to remember that teaching is learning and that I get to continue to learn both myself and for you all is pretty cool.
Well, there you go. Like, learning is a lifelong journey.
Right?
One of your questions that always stuck with me was, who is your role model? So who is your role model? Who inspires you day to day?
Let's see here. The non-real answer, like the superficial for fun answer, right now my role model is Damian Lillard. He's the greatest athlete I've ever experienced. And his leadership, his connection, his willingness to provide and create a culture, I think is hands down the best. That would be my for fun answer. Also weird, by the way, because I'm 8 years older than him, and I was initially resistant to the idea of putting someone younger than me as my role model. But my real role model is, my dad and my uncle, who is not blood uncle. They just, they're those type of family uncles. And I think that everything I just said about Dame superficially actually is the case for my father. He's a sweetheart of a man. He's compassionate. He cares. I never had a lot of rules, which I think if we're talking about classroom management styles, I was just kind of brought up that you respect goodness and then you'll get respect in return. And it's really hard for me to be punitive or to punish people based on actions. It's more, at that point, it's more of why'd you do that? Which I think he just instilled in me that people are worthy of listening to. People are worthy of being excited about. Anything that I am or anything that I want to be, I found out when I was about 22 or 23 that it was my dad.
I don't know if you have an answer to this necessarily, but if there's something you could change about the education system, what would it be?
Oh, yeah. Why would I have any answers in this? Everyone who loves their job also hates their job. And the hate means they could do it better. What would I change about the education system? The easiest, quickest thing as an answer would be grades. I don't think that grades are an effective use of what school is for. In a small portion of it, this year I decided I'm not going to assess my students' conventions in their essays. And the reason I came to that, I'll assess them in a different way, in a different forum. But the reason I came to that is because if an essay is supposed to be a reflection of ideas and what you think about something that you just experienced, then I don't understand how it makes full sense for your lack of convention knowledge to negatively impact your grade. Right? If the grade is on the idea, then I don't know how the function is also part of the grade. That can be something else. And then at that point, what are you who am I to assess, right? I'm an English major and I'm a teacher, so I would love to assess your ideas. But I'm not a journalism student. I know my conventions better than you do, but if someone would take me to town, if I was talking to a legitimate author, and I told them about sentence structure. And I just think that, again, this is part of learning. And so I think grades are a really easy way for people to uphold and say, see, look at how good I'm doing. It's a really easy way for parents to either get happy or angry at their student. It doesn't make sense if the idea of school is to learn and not just to perform. In general, I would like to switch that mindset a little bit. That would be it's a huge undertaking And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be, like, I wish school could be more like sports, where there's like winners and losers and a box score at the end, and everyone can see how they did. And like, but you could also see how maybe you connected to the entire, game. But we can't, because people don't work like that. And it's not, I don't think it's ever your fault. I think every time I get upset with a student who like needs an A, quote unquote, I just take a second and I think about it. And it's like, I'm not the one who has to get into college. I'm not the one who maybe has punishments attached to my grade. I'm not the one who was up 3 hours on an essay and then goes, wait a minute, what? Like, I just taking a step back and thinking like, what's the ultimate goal? And did they put in the effort, and do they have the baseline knowledge that quote unquote deserves it? Then let's have a conversation. It's not giving out A's, but it is like, if you're willing to buy into what school is, then I'm willing to give a little bit to maybe help out on the other end. But there's a lot wrong with education. That's just one thing.
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on that. And in your experience with a teacher, as being a teacher, correct me if I'm wrong, but you attended the Oregon Associated Student Council summer camp as a counselor, right? So how do you think that experience affected your teaching style and your experience as a teacher?
OASC is a weird beast, where it's extremely intimate and also really quick. I won't say vapid. I don't think that it's vapid. I think there is depth, and I think there are real connections made. But it is weird that the intensity of those feelings happen for like at most a week, and then at least like a 2-night, fall conference or something. So in terms of what did I learn, I think a lot of what I was saying before of like, students have lives too. Even the quote unquote good, well-adjusted students have lives too. And that provides turmoil. I was actually just talking to a buddy of mine who is also an OASC alum and pretty well integrated. And he and I were talking about how one of the harder parts for us growing up was, again, like our lives were good, right? And so when you get to these exercises like voices, and someone has a devastating background, a devastating moment, you almost get to that moment where you're like, shoot, do I even get to feel bad about my life circumstance? And I think that what OASC allows is for everyone to understand that they're all coming at it from different angles. Again, which I think translates over into teaching pretty well. I would also say that, especially because I started as a senior counselor when I was about 26, I think, 26 or 27. And at that point, I was 2 or 3 years into teaching, and it allowed me to hone some of my maybe rougher attributes, for a stupid word. Like my classroom management got probably exponentially better because instead of 30 people at a time, I had to control 200 people. Things like that. Or maybe at 25, I just learned this cool thing and I want to make sure that you know about it. And OASC reminds you that there's more people who also have voices, so you need to step back, right? So like, as much as I do talk in class and as excited as I am, and as I'm aware that probably like a student says something and probably way too many times in a day that I'm like, oh yeah, I think about this. It used to be a lot more. Yeah, it's given me, OASC was a cool place to think of everybody as leaders and not just the person who's in charge.
Well said. I think going to OASC, and Ali can probably agree with this as well, has been literally one of the best decisions of my life, like the summer camp, life-changing. Alrighty, coming at you with our last question. Do you have a last piece of advice for seniors or for any of our listeners in general?
A last piece of advice. I'll give you two. One, it'll be quick, is don't chase the night. And that's metaphorical. If you were, quote, supposed to have a great night, that doesn't mean that you have to stay up until 2, 3, 4 a.m. trying to chase it. Just know when it's okay to go home. I think that that's a general piece of advice. And I think maybe a more pertinent to right now piece of advice is try and avoid using the phrase back to normal, because I think that normal is what the problem is right now, is that we shut down a year ago. We were trying to figure it out. People needed normal, and it's rampaged far beyond what we needed it to. And it's because the conception of, I think anyway, it's because the conception of what normal is just so comfortable, and maybe be willing to adjust as a result of turmoil.
Well said once again, totally. Well, that's a wrap on Tualatin Talks. Thank you so much to Mr. O'Donnell for being our guest this week. It's been lovely to chat with you. So thank you so much for all your time.
Absolutely. Thank you both.